Welcome to Locally Speaking, a podcast where two elected officials chat about the municipalities and regional districts that make up local governments in BC and how we manage to get anything done at all.
I'm Brenda.
And I'm Alton.
And in today's episode, we want to talk about British Columbia's smallest communities, the people who live there, and the advantages and disadvantages to being a small or remote community. These communities make up a very important and often under-recognized part of our province. We recently learned that the smallest incorporated village in BC is Zeballos, which had a population of only 126 people as of the 2021 census.
We don't have anyone from Zeballos with us today, but who we do have is Councillor Sarah Fowler of the Village of Tahsis. Sarah has been on council since 2018 and also sits as a director at large on the executive of the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, or as those of us on the mainland like to refer to it, the Association of Coastal Communities in Vancouver Island. As of 2021, the Village of Tahsis has a population of 393, which is up a whopping 58% from 2016. Sarah, welcome. Tell us about yourself. Where did you come from and how did your path take you to Tahsis?
Thank you, Alton and Brenda, for the invitation to talk to you today. Your first question is a great choice of words because in the First Nations language, Tahsis means path. It refers to the grease trail that people would walk along to trade with their neighbors to the north. I've lived here for 12 years, and I am from the Great Lakes area originally. I first came to the Village of Tahsis as a seasonal silviculture worker, so that just means I planted trees in Nooka Sound. And since then, I've started my family in Homestead. So it's been a long journey to get here to the end of the land and where the water is. It's the ocean side, the west side. And I really also like, too, what you are saying about how the coastal communities think that Vancouver Island is a vibe, but the coastal communities are definitely in on the joke, right? We're all like ocean people, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so when you say the Great Lakes, you came from Ontario then?
Yeah, I'm from London, Ontario.
Yeah. So it's just goes to show you tree planting can take you anywhere. Like, honestly, that's such a diversion.
You got elected in 2018. When did you actually move to Tahsis, or were you there part-time? Did you just jump in or what?
Exactly. So I came here just as a seasonal worker, and I lived when I first got to Vancouver Island, I lived in Courtenay and in Parksville. And I think it was in 2009 when I became a sort of full-time resident of Tahsis and I started making my life here. I was renting place still, but I've pretty much lived on every street in the Village of Tahsis. And I have really seen, the town change, even though I wasn't here from the previous incarnation because there was a mill and that shut down in 2020. So people who arrived then, it would have been much different than when I arrived when the mill was already decommissioned. I first came to plant trees in Alberta and then came even farther west all the way.
For sure, our coastal communities have seen a ton of change going from being, mill towns, logging towns to tourism, small footprint, remote work, like whatever they can do to survive, right?
So Alton, you're the stats guy and you've got here that their population has increased 58% from 2016. So if the mill has closed, what have you guys attributed that population growth to?
Affordable housing.
Oh, say no more, right?
I think it's important to understand that when there is no sort of because this is an industry town in the sense that it used to be owned, the Tahsis company, and then it became the incorporated Village of Tahsis. Yeah, okay. 50 years ago. So at one point, every single building was owned by the mill, and you were assigned a house. And so that has long been gone, but there's still the mill manager's house, right? Like that house still exists, and that is the biggest and nicest house in town, right?
Yeah.
So the housing supply is quite old. That is one of the sort of benefits and challenges, right? We have seen a lot of people with COVID move here because suddenly living in a condo and sharing an elevator with people and breathing the same air as your neighbors was more of a health risk. So you can get more house when you move farther to the country. And so I have a like kind of large house that I have a small mortgage on, and it has been really helpful. I don't think I would be able to get a house anywhere else.
If I were to move to Tahsis and there was a 2-bedroom house for rent, what would it go for? Like ballpark?
It's really hard to find things for rent.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There has been a lot of people who over the years, because this Tahsis, Vancouver Island, it is sort of a cottage country or a tourism destination for people, whether they come from Alberta or from America. A lot of Americans have second homes here and come here to fish. So I would say that, like, there's a house across the street from me and it was rented, but now it's for sale. And so there's been a big kind of, sometimes when you see 100,000, so like a 100% increase on your assessment, but you didn't do anything to your house and it's just from the market expanding. That's one thing. But then when you do make improvements on the house, then I know that when we moved into the house, we've been able to now put a new roof on it. So it's more valuable than it was before because it was leaky before.
Right. So what's that house going for that's for sale across the street?
Under 400,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. There's definitely, like I helped the lady paint the ceilings and she got a new tub. And so she's flipped a few houses in this town and she lives half the year in Mexico because she's retired. So she comes here and spends the summer and then spends the winter in Mexico. And yeah, it's a 2-bedroom house and it's got ground level access. So like that's one of the things that's sometimes good for accessibility issues. And so I feel like there's a lot of value in antiques, I guess, like fixing up old houses and improving the infrastructure. And you find a lot of cool things. Like it's an unfinished basement underneath the like ground level entry. And there's like a phone that I think it was like direct call to the mill. Like it's one of those things that's just like been there for so long and still works. So definitely a lot of stories. I even know some people who moved here from Edmonton. They had to do a lot of improvements on their house and their foundation. And when they were doing that, they're like, oh, it costs a lot more to get concrete here than it would if we were living in Edmonton. So just the sort of mobilization costs. And they had to fill some caves that were in limestone in the foundation of their home. So there's sort of two sections to Tahsis. There's the flats, as we call it. It's the low lands near the river, and it's been a filled in estuary. So that has some challenges. And then there's the high ground, which is where I live now, in the town site area. And that has other challenges too, in the sense that, earthquakes can get you no matter where you live. I remember living in this house on my kid's second birthday, and there'd be an earthquake, and I thought it was from them jumping on the bed. But it was, in fact, the whole neighborhood shaking. So there's definitely a lot of range, I guess. Like I saw a lot, which was just an overgrown lot for sale for 50 grand. But my house has seen improvements. We're slowly getting the curb appeal. We've painted 2 sides of the house, so we still have 2 to go.
So you've touched on it a couple spots. You mentioned the accessibility and like the cost of, buying a lot for $50,000. Well, nobody who lives in Victoria should be thinking about running to Tahsis and commuting, because not only is Tahsis a small town, but it's a remote town. And you mentioned mobilization issues for trades. Well, what other issues can being remote cause for a community like Tahsis?
Well, I think that the first thing I'll say about, remote is it's remote in Sunshine Coast too, in some parts, right? Where you're closer to a dock than you are to a road. I know that in Cayucit or in Zabalis, there are more water infrastructure. I know people who take, it's not a school bus, but a school boat, right? And I think that's one part of things. So it's just going back to sort of the traditional highways, which were the rivers and streams and ocean, instead of the sort of built infrastructure that we know of. And another part about being, we have road access to our town in Tahsis, but sometimes like just the this cold snap that we've been having the last few days, a lot of trees fell down on the road. There's only one road. So when a tree falls down, you have to be prepared, and somebody goes first and leads the way with their chainsaw and cuts the timber off the road. And last year, in January, we had a 10-day power outage because we had snow for 10 days. And
Holy smokes.
And that really, yeah, like you say, there is a lot of people who are moving here from Victoria, and then they're buying 2 properties, and one's an income property, and now they have a job already. So hopefully when they survive their first winter and they realize it does rain more here in the rainforest proper than it does in the like rain shadow south, then they sort of have a more realistic expectation of the service delivery that we're able to provide in small towns. But because we're a company town, it's like, to me, inheriting a castle, right? It's like, oh, wow, thanks. This is amazing. It's like so wonderful to have this great inheritance, but there's a lot of things that are more holes than shirt, right? You know, there's a lot of things that are at the end of their useful life, and that can be a challenge. It's difficult to age in place if you have complex medical issues,
Right.
because it is a 3-hour drive to Campbell River on the best of times. When I had my 2 children, I was able to be served by our local health clinic, but needed to leave home 2 weeks before my due date to be closer to a hospital. And so that's something that I know has an actual day. You know, when you have a heart attack or when you have a head injury or these sorts of things, you hope that it's good weather.
Yeah, you can't predict those things. Being on council, what are your like burning issues?
I think a lot about, because I've been working as the chair of the Tahsis Age-Friendly Accessibility Committee. That's a lens that I tend to look at a lot. It's getting wound down, the funding, and getting passed on to, like, I think BC Healthy Communities now, but there was a lot of age-friendly studies when I first got elected in 2018.
Yeah.
We had 2. We had one that was just sort of general, and then one that was focused on transportation. I know that my grandfather, when he had dementia, he couldn't drive anymore, but he lived on a bus route in London. So that's a lot different than, like, I recently had some eye challenge, and I had to get like a laser thing in Victoria, and I couldn't drive, right? You know, and if I can't drive, then I can't get home because there is no bus, right? So there's definitely a lot of we are the ones we're waiting for here in the country. And the burning issues on the Tahsis Council, burning is the operative word. Our fire hall has been condemned. So
oh my god.
No.
So that's it's like there's homelessness, and then there's recruiting people into your volunteer fire department when you have no clubhouse or nowhere to hang up your helmet.
Is it an old mill building like the fire hall?
It's so we've had a few fire halls over the years. Obviously, before I got here, there was one building called the TV building, Tahsis Valley, and it was sold. And so now it's privately owned. And then the building that was condemned during my last term was a DFO building. It was built well in the sense that it, you know, it's concrete cinder block building, but it's on a floodplain, and there's shifting foundation problems and cracks in the walls, and it just got to be so much that you couldn't. And that was also when the building in Miami fell down on people. So, you know,
Right.
it's interesting how, like, when like the Bamfield crash happened, that was when someone went missing on the Tahsis Road, you know? And so there's things that you see similarities in. And I think that with the fire department here in Tahsis is we are a volunteer fire department. And you mentioned Zabalis in your introduction. They're just over the mountain from us. So you could walk there if you could.
Got
But
desperate.
yeah. But the best way to get there is by boat. I think they're back to offering fire service, but there was a time when they had not enough people. They had the boots and they had the fire truck and they had the building, but
Right.
they didn't have the human resource, right? And so
That's scary.
yeah, we have a little bit more people than Zabalis, but we don't have a neighboring First Nation that is here, right? Like the closest First Nation, we're on Mawichamuchulat territory here in Tahsis, and the Texana is 63 kilometers away. So even though this is the winter home of Moquina, but we don't have many of the people, the population. So I know in Zabalas, they're able to have more kids in their school, whether it's fire department or garbage truck. It's about service delivery to these homes, these places. And so we just have 3 neighborhoods in Tahsis, which is the town site and the flats, and cardiac climb is the in between.
So I'm stuck on this fire hall now. What's your plan? Like, it's a volunteer fire department. Are they part of the municipal structure? Are they a fire improvement district? How is your community looking at going forward with resolving this?
Okay, so this is what I prepared for question number 2. Money is numbers, so let's start there. We have a fleet of 18 vehicles in the village of Tahsis, and that includes 2 pumper trucks for our volunteer fire department, a duty officer's truck, a wildland trailer, an old garbage truck, and some for our public works crew. There is no public transit, and all the housing stock is built 50 years ago, except for the new Coast Guard building. Our infrastructure is a patchwork, and we have 2 sewage treatment plants, but hope to seek grants for deactivating the one on the lower town that is at the end of its useful life and add a lift station and only have pump time at the north plant. It's important to understand that big or small, water tests and quality, residential roads and sewers, plus the hydrants, have minimum standards. So with our fire department, we have a CCAN and we park the fire trucks at Public Works for now because they do have a garage at sorts. But that means that the Public Works trucks are now outside. The challenge with having your fire department in a CCAN is that you can't wash your turnout gear in a CCAN, right? And these are some of the basic level, I think it's the fire commissioner's playbook.
Right.
And so one of the plans that we have had to do, it was like a 4-year discussion of what are our options, right? What can we do? We knew that it was coming to that end, but that's the thing about putting things off, that they don't tend to get better when you ignore them. And our goal is to get a grant to move forward with taking the shop that is in the school and turn that into the fire hall. If we lose our fire department service, my house will go up at least $100 in insurance for house.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And so that's just me, right? And then everybody else has that. And so there's this sort of idea of bearing the cost together or not. And that's a political question. You know, not everybody is comfortable with investing in infrastructure. I also know that another sort of part of the tension is that, you know, the rich and the poor don't really understand each other's problems, right? You know, like they're too separate from each other. And I think that the hope is that when we have a new sort of home base for the fire department, I know that it can be a challenge to recruit when there's not like sort of this clubhouse mentality, right?
It's not sexy, or morale's not the right word, but it's definitely a morale booster to have a
right
shiny
near
fire
there.
hall.
Yeah. I like the word morale because you do need to believe in things. Like there's been a fire on it was kilometer 17 in a cut block on the road out of town. So that's about halfway to Mucha Bay, which is 25 kilometers from here.
Right.
And so in order to drive to Mucha Bay during that 2018 fire, you would have to pass on one side of the road fire. And it ended at where the cut block was. It didn't spread. But then there was another one here in town that was up on the hills. And so that was something too that Zabalas had a fire that was up on the hill that was sort of like threatening moving downwards to where the people were. And yeah, I know that there's priorities too for that kind of thing.
So with the fire, are you guys pursuing evacuation planning grants? Like, you've only got one road, and the water. So obviously water is your plan for getting out of any sort of disaster, right?
There is 2 ways, right? You know, there's to leave by the road, or there's a boat that could come. But another one of our decaying infrastructures are wharfs. Like we have 2 wharves in the village of Tahsis that are government wharves, but one has been condemned and given to the Coast Guard. And then the one that we currently have is the airplane dock. So that's the one that we're still using and limping into, you know, and again, we are trying to pursue grants because we know that this is our emergency evacuation route. I remember telling my kids, if there's fire in the back door, go out the front door, go to the creek nearby our house and slide down the river to the ocean. So I I know that that seems a little bit extreme, but it's the same way that we have go bags for emergencies, tsunamis, flashlights for power outages. I don't have wood heat in my home. I wish I did,
Especially
because
during a 10-day power outage, right?
yeah. And, these are the goals. And I see how having a plan A, B, C, and D is helpful. And I guess that sort of speaks to some of the emergency management experiences that I've had in my life. A lot of North Island small communities got together and signed a joint letter about how the minimum standards continue to go up for fire halls, but there is no funding stream for this. There is no provincially responsible body to say that if you're a volunteer firefighter in Tahsis, you get a new SCBA.
Right.
You get new boots, you get new whatever, right? Like we have to like nickel and dime our way to getting like the basic stuff that we need to continue to offer these services.
That's a good lead into your work on the AVICC. How has that been for you?
It was really hard to get on the board at the AVICC. I put my name forward 4 times for nominations. So I'm so glad that I finally got in
Persistence.
there. Yeah. And so that was a really interesting thing. My first AVICC was in Powell River. And I find it really useful to hear from other people in other places. So I am a huge celebrator, I guess, of regional associations. As coastal people, what are our coastal issues,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that people underappreciate through AVICC and the other local government associations is our ability to lobby together. If Tahsis knows that it needs more grant funding for its fire department, it can go and get support from the other coastal communities. And we can come together and we can go to the province and say, hey, our smaller communities need more fire department funding. It's time you guys step up.
Well, and just what you said, it was actually Dennis Dugas, the past mayor of Fort Hardy, and he was the first one who started this letter for North Island communities. In one of the government funding streams, fire halls were a non-eligible expense, and now fire halls are an eligible expense. So we've seen how that lobbying can actually be successful and it trickled down to the ones who really need it.
That's a great example of advocacy. It's really hard to be able to quantify the work that's done when we go to these conventions. And I think they all think it's sit down dinners and free receptions and drink tickets. But there's actually a lot of work that gets done at these conventions. And that's a great example.
When everything sort of went virtual and COVID, made it so that it was more normal to just call in to your job, that made it so much easier for me to participate in things. So now I was able to bring small town issues from Tahsis to these bigger tables. And I don't know that we would be able to participate otherwise, but I do see a lot of value in having, like there's the meeting and then there's the pregame and the postgame, right? And
Yeah,
when
100%.
you're listening to a keynote speaker at AVICC or whatever, then we're also sitting beside each other talking about what are ground level stuff happening in our communities.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great way to put it, too. Does your community maintain a close relationship with the First Nations? And how has that evolved over time?
As Tahsis is historically the winter village for Chief McQuina, we recognize how crucial maintenance and evolution in relationships are within the Muchalat First Nations area. In the past, our late Mayor Schooner has done the C2Cs. That's the Community to Communities grant. And we have a plaque hang up in our council chambers saying that we've done this like work where we listen to the needs of each other. It has really changed in more of a project way, where we have the Unity for Communities. That's a trail to Zabalas. For the last 20 years, people have been trying to do economic development work with a multi-use trail to go connecting to Zabalas, so we wouldn't be a dead end road. There would be, in fact, a North Island loop. And there's a lot of interest from adventure bikers and stuff like that who want to take, rips on the rough road, the gravel roads. And also another thing that I've been able to do is work with the NSWS, that's the Nootka Sound Watershed Society. So with them, I've been representing the village for the last 4 years, and it's taking all the different stakeholders in the sound, which is there's DFO, there's Nachalnith. I got to go on this micro trolling, so I'd never been fishing before, even though I lived here 12 years, and I got to go fishing on an NTC boat. That's the Nachalnith Tribal Council, and I got to learn about what is important to the people who've always lived here, right? That's the biggest thing, like being in a boat with someone who says, oh, that mountain over there, that's how we find out where we are. We look at that mountain and we look at that mountain and we see, oh, this is a good place to drop the trap. These are the landmarks.
That's awesome. Yeah.
There's another thing that I learned on the watershed board that the nation is working on. There's 3. One in Scotland, one in Korea, and one here at Friendly Cove, which is at the end of the Tahsis Inlet, or we're at the end and they're at the beginning, depending on how you look at it. And so they're doing this tidal power thing where they have this like floating thing, and then they got these like cords and a power takedown, and they're trying to make this little micro tidal energy thing that's going to provide power to the people who live at UQuat, which is the place of many winds.
That sounds amazing. That sounds like you've got some really cool stuff going on in your area. That's great.
What's it like in the Sunshine Coast? It's
well,
not as small as Tahsis, but how many people live there?
Well, in Seychelles, there's about 11,000. Okay. We're in stage 4 water restrictions in November.
Our lake is empty.
Yeah.
Our lakes, plural, are empty. We've siphoned them down below the natural levels of the dams and all that. We didn't start getting precipitation until it was below 0 at the lakes, so it's all fallen as snow up in the mountains, which is why it's the middle of November and we're still on stage 4 water restrictions.
I would love to say something about that. My podcast is called Waterfowl, and so water has been like the main thoroughfare of what I'm doing, and I have been following this lady, Megan Curson. She's in Cumberland, and something that she wrote on the internet recently was, snow is next year's water.
That's right.
Rain is today's water, right? And I find that so valuable and interesting, because when I go to the chicken yard, I flip all the buckets upright so they can hold water, so they water themselves, right? And so I know too, when I went to Lasqueti Island, the Gulf Island, you had water if you had a dugout. Right. But if you didn't, you didn't, right? So there's a lot of collecting the rainwater and not just letting it flush out while it is raining. Water demand for drinking is one thing, then for commercial, then farming, there's so many levels to.
Plus, we need to maintain a certain level of flow in the creek for the fish. During the height of our problems, we were using like 8.5, 9 million liters a day for drinking water, which included our commercial uses and things like that. And we were releasing another 17 million liters a day for the fish. The only reason our creek didn't die like the ones up North Island this year is because we were releasing water for the fish.
Mm-hmm. And so that's another thing, like who can you call to come and collect fish in buckets and move them to the water, right? Like there's definitely been a lot of concern with, I know in the Cowichan area, they've been doing that for a while, like having to sort of have stream keepers and, fish mobilizing armies.
Intervene. Yeah.
And I see too that like already the enhancement work that we do is intervening. The fish farms is also intervening because we do need to have inputs, right? And outflows. There's a big range between the different kinds of water situations in, your community to my community. We have a lot of water. We actually are on a well now, but we used to be on the McKelvey intake, which is previously our water source. And I think that When I got elected in 2018, that was the main issue. There's effects on water systems, right? It's not just the fish or the timber or any one specific resource, but it's a system that is interconnected, and having enough water to keep those fish going means that you had fish for eating, right?
Right, for sure. You mentioned a well, and the town being on a well now. How long did that process take you guys to get through?
It was during the last council before 2018 that they had decided to do a well. And the current mayor, Mayor Davis, he does citizen science, and he understands a lot more than I do about the water systems, the flows in caves, underground rivers, these sorts of things, and how maybe a well wasn't the best idea, but it was already decided. We also maintain the water license on the McKelvey Creek intake as a secondary,
Okay.
because we recognize that a lot of the other resources have sort of left. They've left the area, and so water is still the thing that we have a lot of. It was a long process.
Listening from our side of the water, it's definitely an enviable position to be in, where you're trying to figure out how to get rid of your excess water. And I mean, just run a pipe to Seashell. It's fine.
I hear a lot of crazy stories sometimes, like, oh, there's like a boat that comes in the middle of the night to the deep water port, and all this water goes on there. Bottles of water just get it loaded, and I'm like, no, I don't see this happening. But I'm not awake all the time. And I would love to, this is the thing about regionalism, right? We're coming back to why is the AVICC worth sending your elected delegates to? Because we with too much water and you with too little water, we can work it together. We can find a way to work with our neighbors, and sort of Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean, right? There's things that we don't have here that you have, right? I reckon,
Like homelessness?
I don't know. We have that. But there is a lot of just sort of roughly housed people more than
the term we use here is inappropriately housed.
Yeah.
Right? People that might not be living in a house that they can maintain, or that's too small for their family needs, or is too big for their family needs, right?
That's a huge thing. I would say that we have houses, I have 4 people living in my home because I have 2 kids and 1 spouse, and many of the houses in this town have 1 person for a 4-bedroom house. I know people who haven't been able to put a new roof on their home, who have had it rain inside their home, who can't do any improvements, whether that is financial or otherwise, an inability to keep up with the maintenance of their home. Sometimes people don't have any other choices but to live the way they live. And I've even said to my friend, who was a Victoria councillor, where do you think people move to when they get priced out of Victoria? Right? They move away to somewhere else cheaper. And, there's not a single building in this town outside of the Coast Guard building that is recently built. Everything else is grandfathered. We're in a really intense time of polarization, and it's not just I can afford a house and you can't. It's not just I can afford to pay my water bill or my hydro bill, but not both, right? There's definitely a lot of challenges, I guess. I didn't have a lot of time for my resident who wanted to show me the diary of every time her neighbor's dog barked. But I also understand that people come with the baggage that they have. But I also recognize that there's so much range, right? I've lived rough. I know what that's like, being a tree planter and paying $33 a day to live in your own tent where you're outside and it's snowing on you, it's a way to go broke, but also it was a part of the journey to get to here, right? And I recognize how I am now in a privileged position living up on the hill in a home that has heat. When we had our 10-day long power outage, we didn't, we as a small, closely knit community knew whose chimney wasn't blowing smoke and who might need community paramedic intervention. We had a warming center in our rec center. It was run on a diesel generator. And we had cots that we brought down from our tsunami sea cans from the high ground. We brought them down to the low ground so that people could sleep in the gym instead of staying in their home. But we also had people who were serving those people food who had to go back to their cold home. I feel like my motto, since this is going to be my second term, and it feels like a decade has passed since 2018, but I feel like the motto here is help the helpers. I understand how my neighbors know me. They can tell things about me. They know how I'm feeling. They know if my car is broken, who am I going to talk to, right? You know, like I know the comings and goings. We look out for each other. And I feel like you can't put a price on that. You know, you can't put a price on understanding the situation of people who are in your lives.
And I love what you just said. I just thought of something I wanted to ask you. I know we've just started this term, but in 2026, Mayor, do you think about that?
Yeah, you bet. I don't know. Someone asked me already for this past election that we just survived if I would run for mayor in 2022. And I said, no, I have a lot of confidence in the mayor that we currently have. And I am the deputy mayor. So I am the Robin to his Batman, you know, like he does the bat caving and, you know, all these things that I don't do. And I do the things that he doesn't do. And so we bring a lot. And so I can see how this is what I am good at. It's just really sad to kind of
say it like you mean it.
It's really sad. Like I went to a family funeral when I was in Ontario, and my neighbor shot the bear in the yard, and I had to tell my cousin, I'm like, yeah, I lie for a living now. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a counselor and I'm not a therapist, right? So it's like this very interesting wordplay of, yes, I want to know your problems. Yes, I'm listening. Yes, I might tell other people about them because that's how it has to be. It can't be, oh, Sarah, you'll keep my secrets from me. No, the whole point of public engagement is to be heard and echoed. You know, it's like to let things in. And that was like at that LGLA that I met you in Parksville. That was when Mayor Osborne of Tofino talked about not having a thick skin, but a semi-permeable membrane. And I do find I let things in and pull them out when I need them, you know, when they're really like pertinent to things. And I find that's to be the most important thing. I don't want to, like, I with Pelosi and her husband getting attacked, I don't want my family to be attacked because I'm good at understanding people's needs. I'm good at understanding the things that are hard to understand. Our inaugural meeting was kind of a mess, and I felt like I had to be blamed for some of the decisions of the past council because I was a surviving person from it. And I may have been the deciding person 2-2, and then I decided. But I decided based on what I knew at the time and based on public engagement, giving the people what they want and then having buyer's remorse, you know? So it's like this like balance between, I know that working with other people in other communities is a way that we can get ourselves understood. We have had in the Village of Tahsis a lot of value in terms of timber and fish export this area. And there is definitely a sense of, hey, is anything going to come back around to us? You know, and I recognize that that's my job. That's my job, is to point out how, like at the UBCM in Whistler, the thing that this guy, Brad West, Mayor West, and he said at the resource breakfast, he said, my community is a resource dependent community. And he said it twice. And that was like music to my ears because we're the resources that are getting sent out, right? You know, these smaller communities. And another thing at the Small Talk Forum that I was able to participate in when I gave a talk about the detention pond was that there are more small communities than big ones. This is a Donna McMahon thing, you know, there's more of us as maybe have-nots than the haves that have a bakery and a bank on every corner, right? But I would not want to live in the city anymore. I've lived in Toronto. I'm glad I don't. I'm glad I live here in Tahsis now, and I'm glad that I have been able to experience the kind of relationships of getting to know your neighbors and getting to understand someone you think you're not like, someone you think that you're separate from, like it's been a huge learning experience. I hope that in 4 years I still have the appetite for it, because it can be a really challenging job. I don't do anything else. This is what I do now for my life, for my money, and I make the joke a lot, and my kids don't like it, that if we had to live off my income, we'd live under the bridge. And that's not funny to tell your kids, right?
For sure.
But it's also one of those things about, like, I'm teaching them to be scrappy like I am.
And if you're from a small community, you've got to be scrappy.
You have to.
You know what? Just speaking from a mother's point of view, so many things that you've just said in the last 5 minutes are incredible values that you're going to end up teaching them by them watching you do your work, right? And that is invaluable, even though you probably should be making more than you're making. Because that is also a discussion that comes up in our community.
I'm sure it's the same for you too. I know that in Squamish, they have, and this is again a very different situation from both Seychelles and Tahsis, but in Squamish, they've made it so that the work that we do here is you can go on mat leave or paternity leave with these hours, right? Like, because this is the thing that I learned when I was having my youngest child. She's 7 now, and so I worked at the fishing lodge down the way, and I needed to get enough hours to be able to get maternity leave.
Right.
So I was trying to get hours, and I recognize now that I work this job and I put in more hours in a day than there actually are. I see how I don't work in that model anymore. Like, there is no workplace bullying and harassment policy. There is no hours worked towards your child benefit kind of thing. Like, there is not a lot of protections for elected residents. And I know that I need democracy. I really need it. And I know that I'm not alone. I know that people need me to need it. Like, I'm not only trying to get a fire department, a new fire hall for myself. It's a bigger public interest. And I will continue to make those arguments, I guess. Like, during this election season, I had a business owner come to me and say, the last 4 years is the best I've ever seen this town managed. And he's been here for a long time. And that was a huge, like, oh, I didn't think you cared, Like, I guess I was really surprised to have sort of a friend in that person. It's not just poor and rich. Sometimes it's seasonal and, like, all year round people. There's like these, are you a visitor? Is it worth getting to know you? There's like some strange dances that we dance,
dynamics.
I guess. Yeah, dynamics for sure. And I was just really happy because I wasn't a bad lifeguard. I wasn't a bad waitress, but I might be finding the thing that I'm the best at, that I can actually do well, and I actually am and informed. And I really get out a lot out of doing OCP and having this sort of longer term vision beyond me. Like, I won't live forever, but I want the sort of choices and I want the town to still be here. It's been here since before Canada.
Right. And that's a really valuable way to look at it, right? One of the things that the First Nations do teach is that we need to be looking 6 or 7 generations down the road. And it's not just 6 or 7 generations from where we came from. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Sarah. We appreciate everything that you've shared with us about Tahsis, about small communities, about yourself. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure for me too.
I just wanted to add that your passion for the work that you do really shows through, and it's very inspiring. So thank you. And we'll see you at LGLA.
I
Excellent.
look forward to it. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for listening to Locally Speaking, a podcast where two local government officials chat about our regional districts and municipalities that make up local government here in British Columbia. If you aren't following our podcast yet, you can subscribe wherever you consume your podcasts. Maybe you have a topic suggestion for the show, or you want to come and chat with us about what's going on in your area of the province. Drop us a line at locallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com, and let's make it happen.
Locally Speaking is recorded on the traditional territory of the Sechelle Nation.